My name's Lawrence Dudney from Heatherwick Studio, and we're delighted to have won our category, and really it's a pleasure to present to you Vessel this morning. My colleague had to go back to London for urgent business, but I'm excited to present to you the project I was leading for 5 years. So in 2013, we were invited to be part of the Hudson Yards project. It was a fully formed conceptual master plan when we joined, and we were tasked to design the centerpiece in the middle. It was a highly ambitious city project where we have a whole piece of new city being built at the same time in Manhattan, over 30 live railway lines which were all in operation during construction. The client came to us to think about this open space within the master plan. Its issue, or the oddness of it, is that it's open towards the west, and then it hinges and turns towards the north. And so we had to think about how to create a center here. We were surrounded by hyper-tall buildings, so we didn't want to compete on scale or with height. This was going to be a project for us about changing the expectations of what public space could be. So we immediately became interested in thinking of projects and places which we thought were successful gathering spaces, so such as the Spanish Steps in Rome, which is sort of magnetic for people to come and congregate on. We also looked at Fort Worth, which was by Philip Johnson, which is a sort of tectonic bowl that sinks you down underground, sort of protective from the city. And we saw things such as this, which is like rich variety, materiality, and texture, which really is an inviting place and pulls you in. And for us, we were thinking about how staircases and 3D nature of public space can also be credited to how people want to be there and hang around. So innovations such as the Eiffel Tower, thinking about vertical public space, but also how an object can create its own context. And also things that completely assigned to history, such as this kind of experimental promenade that never got built, but is super intriguing to us. We didn't want to do this. We didn't want to create a sculpture that sat in the plaza. We didn't think this was the right response to the client's problem. For us, this was a project about gathering, socialization, and a focus. So in sort of simple, wobbly hand sketch mode, we didn't want to have something where you'd walk along, take a photograph, and then keep going. For us, it's about taking a plaza full of people and lifting those people up into the air, creating a 3D landscape that you can explore free of use. So we were quite inspired by the stepwells in Rajasthan and in India. They take you down to the water table below, but for us, they're sort of ceremonial, and there's a sort of rhythmic sense to it, which is quite attractive. And we thought that as a piece of infrastructure, it's quite beautiful in its own right. So flashing forward, this is Vessel. It's 150 feet tall. At its base, its diameter, it's 50 feet wide. And then it rises up and becomes 150 feet wide at the top. That's purposely done so that the plaza around the base is open up and not taken up by the project. It's warm in its materiality to welcome you in, and on the inside there's 154 interlocking staircases and 2,500 steps. There's about 80 platforms which are open, free to use, and flexible, and we designed the structure to be porous and open so that it felt like plaza in the air. We wanted to maintain the outdoor nature of the project. Plus, we wanted to open up the views across to the city beyond, but also across the project so that you could see other people and be seen. So since March 2019, the opening, we've had 1.5 million visitors, but it also has this other life. It's used as a yoga studio in the morning. It does running classes to go up and down for the insane. It's used as car exhibitions, and the backdrop for music videos. But I want to take a step back and start from the beginning. This is from the design to fabrication and a couple of unique pieces on the project, starting off with a digital workflow. So really the issue with this project was about the problem we faced was how do we control, manipulate, and model something that's fundamentally engineering-based, but simultaneously dictated by the flow of human movement. So we were looking at New York City codes for staircases, for angles, for head heights, and thinking about the engineering. And our solution was to come up with a fully integrated project between us the engineers, and the fabricators. And that was crucial so that we could work together and iterate through all the issues and all the problems and work together. So we do what we do on every single project in the studio. We build things as physical models with rapid prototyping, but we also build by hand. But ultimately on this project, we created a script that built the entire project and devised little diagrams so you could understand what parts of the script were doing what, and that at any point, structural engineers or fabricators could extract the information they needed. It was based on a base surface, which creates a wireframe and then builds up the structure around it. The benefit of this allowed us to explore parameters. So to achieve the curvature of the section, we have shorter staircases at the bottom, which rise and grow to become larger staircases at the top. In terms of the porosity, we wanted it to be open and as visually open as possible, so the structure follows the staircases in a zigzagging-like pattern, and this allowed us to understand the stresses in that. The zigzag-like pattern also creates more movement within the structure, so we have tuned mass dampers along the whole top of the project. And in terms of occupation, we set this by not by code, but by comfort. So we could understand how much movement was created by the different populations on the vessel, and therefore cap where we thought was a reasonable. So in terms of prefabrication, we looked at rationalization through rotational symmetry and plan. We looked in terms of transportation by breaking down the elements into dog bone-like shaped pieces so easily move around. And because of the site logistics, we're in the middle of one of Manhattan's biggest construction sites. It was a tight place to work, so prefabrication was really key to do everything off-site so we could be super efficient when we actually get there in New York. So putting these pieces back together again, we came up with a bolting system that's actually internal, and that's so that the bolting is even more durable out of the rain and out of the weather, but meant we had to design a system inside of the structure that people could crawl into and access those bolts. Having separate pieces also meant we could set down to fractions of a millimeter and have real tolerance certainty. In Italy, we were thinking about prefabrication, and this is the first step of our modular piece system in terms of its steelwork. This allowed us to pre-assemble in the factory before we get to New York, and we did this with the bottom 3 levels. This allowed us to troubleshoot anything before we got to New York. Then we could continue with prefabrication, the painting, the MEP, the waterproofing, the cladding, and also the protection for transport. So I want to talk to you about the metal underneath, which is this sort of warm color material. It's 2 years of R&D work, which we went through to get the right finish. We came across PVD, which is physical vapor deposition. It's a finish that's done on an atomic scale, so it's highly durable. But it's also only really been done on the scale of like mobile phone cases and pens and microchips. It's the first time it's been done to this scale and quantity, so we're thinking about color consistency and color durability. But ultimately, because these are all pointing downwards, we wanted this reflective surface to lighten up the structure, but also something that could be easily maintained over time. The elevator is the other very unique element on the project, which was highly challenging. It's an elevator that moves on a curve and accesses the top 3 levels. In order to work out that geometry, it actually moves on an S-like track so that it doesn't crash into the stops, which it's not stopping at. The mechanism is a rack and pinion system that sits underneath the cab, and then above that has a self-leveling platform so it doesn't knock you out of the actual cab while going up and through the curvature. We designed it purposely to sit underneath the cab, so that meant the cab could be open and glassy. So anyone who can't use the stairs has a unique experience that can see into the vessel and also out of the vessel while accessing the top 3 levels. So then in New York, we designed this modular system to be in boats, to be on trailers, on barges, and on large trucks. And as we got to site, we could see how the system started working in terms of its efficiency, with a central crane that picked up and placed these dog bone-like elements in position. So as a project, this is one of the most complicated projects the studio's ever designed, but also the most complicated project the studio's ever constructed. It's essentially a 3D public space that's free to use and offers up to 30,000 square foot of additional plaza on top of the public space around it. And here you can see it with the first views where it was taken with a crane out while it's still in construction. Thank you.
I've only seen it from the outside. The lines are too long to be able to get inside there. But I'm just wondering if you could explain your notion of a public plaza in this respect, because when I think of a plaza, when I think of the things you showed, I think of people talking together, hanging out together, yes, people watching, but there seem to be very few places here where you're not either taking a selfie or walking up and down a staircase. How is this a plaza? How does this bring people together other than to take selfies?
When we were thinking about this, and I suppose the design of the base was really critical. So we designed a podium that it sits on, but effectively to access, there's no gates. You can walk straight in. There's a time ticketing system because, of course, a structure like this, we need to think about a population that had to be capped. So there are certain controls around it that, let's say, plazas don't have, which change certain behaviors. But ultimately, once you're on it, you are free to effectively do what you want. So if people choose to do selfies, they choose to do selfies. But if you choose to do anything else, you can do that too. So in a way, I think for us, it wasn't about creating a place which chose to how people should use it. It's kind of a platform to say, this is for you to interpret. So since opening, we've had interesting TV network shows which use it as a background, exercise classes which are using it as well, and it's sort of taking on its own life, and it's quite interesting seeing these backdrops. We've had strange scenarios of people getting married on it or proposing, so I suppose it is different to a plaza, but it's a sort of, which I suppose is not a bad thing.
I'd like to address its role as a public building and how it affects its community. Because in the case of the two previous projects that we saw, they're very much targeted at the community that lives in and around them, presumably, whereas this building's community is really probably all over the world. But I'd be interested to hear how was, in your design intent, it meant to affect the community around it?
I think, so Hudson Yards as a development, it's a huge mega development, which is designed for certain tenants and people to come live in and has a certain retail component to it. We felt that our job in a way was to sort of react to that and understand what this open space could be in between all these elements. And for us, it was really important that this was free to use. This wouldn't make sense if you had to charge and pay to go on. So we wanted that to be something where anyone could turn up and go on. So, and try and limit the amount of barriers to use. So without this, I think this allows more people to come to the area and use and be more accessible.
But do you think the people who live in this area, life will be enhanced by its presence and what it brings to the place?
I think in terms of a new piece of city, a new open area, I think that's always, I think in terms of what the client's trying to seek to do and offering a new place to New York, it's quite ambitious. So yeah.
But of course, I mean, this is clearly a highly challenging structure. It is clearly attractive, otherwise it would not generate 1.5 million people coming to this location. Well, how many did you say over the last year?
Yeah, 1.5 million people.
1.5 million.
Since March.
So it generates a form of public attractiveness. Maybe you could say that it is also a very nice example of what you later can call active design. People are really forced to walk here and to exercise almost a lot. But I cannot understand how you got this all through in a sense of never a discussion with the client about what you could do with the different user groups coming to this structure, because of course you are not only having the local people here who maybe might like to go up into this and do some sporting or whatever, but you might have a lot of mostly maybe visitors coming to these locations, families, children. Was the client never asking or discussing with you, could there not be a place for children? Could there not be a certain kind of program be connected to the structure? Because it is quite infrastructural.
Yeah. I think I suppose the client was expecting to see a sculpture, and we presented them something as an alternative, rather than having something that's static. It involves participation, and that was really key for us. So the other thing that was key for us from the beginning was not to dictate how it should be used or what people should do with it, and instead let people choose and decide its operation and experiment with it. Just in the same way a park will have sort of more openness, and it has closing times, parks, and open times, but then you can have a fair in it, or sometimes there's a winter garden or something else, or children playing. So we're hoping that will evolve over time, but what we didn't want to do was kind of set those in at the beginning, because that might artificially form it in one way or the other.
For me, this building is more from moment. So if I look to the space, maybe Guggenheim, I'm moving, but I see art. If I'm in Mecca, I have the Kaaba, people are praying, but they are praying, you know. But here, I'm not your generation, so I'm older now. Maybe it's a new thing, it's selfies, because if you are in these platforms, you don't see anything, huh? It's just these towers. You don't see the river really, so it's not, or you didn't show to us when I'm in the platform what I see. I think that was also not the reason. It's just me, some people are moving, and selfies. So maybe that's the thing today, I don't know. It's,
Yeah. Is it a monument?
I would call it public space.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good way to avoid the question, the answer. I will ask another difficult question, and I will do it in a somewhat provocative way. The building, though it started out as a smooth vessel, has turned into a rather jagged pile. It is clad with this copper-like material. It's heavier on the top than at the bottom. It breaks most of the criteria by which we judge things to be beautiful. And it doesn't have a clear entrance. It has none of the things that we expect from a proper monument, or, as we just heard, from a public space. So maybe can you tell us what makes it beautiful? How should we judge it? What criteria should we use other than the fact, and I know this has been thrown back at the critics who they say, well, you obviously don't know what you're talking about because 1.5 million people have come there. So if we can park that for a second, other than the fact that it's popular, give us as a jury some criteria that you would like this to be judged on.
It's a really good question. I think we set out to do a few things in terms of the way that geometry works and the way it looks. So in terms of criteria, so for us, in terms of the materiality and the palette, the warm materiality, which is the copper-like coloring, that was to purposely create a contrast. So we're in the middle of Hudson Yards, which are these towers that are quite cold and glassy. And we thought that it really needed an antidote to that materiality palette, so it felt more inviting. Then when you're actually on the vessel, there's concrete and there is more durable materials which are more regular in New York, so stainless steel and glass. So we kept the palette as simple as possible. So when you look at the vessel, there's only 2 or 3 tones you're really taking in. The other thing I'd say is we purposely were trying to allow the structure and the flow of human movement to be totally entwined. So there isn't two separate systems, it's one system. And that, I suppose, creates the jagged nature which you're talking to. So we never really intended it to be a smooth element, or we intended it to be a round element, so that it is sort of more democratic and people look into each other, because that's something we were really focusing on. I'm not sure if I can respond directly to how you should think if it's beautiful or not. That's for you to decide.
Thank you very much.
Very interesting.